Katerina Jakob watched the German soldiers flee. Streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them. She thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katerina Jakob saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies has never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forests beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Hello and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review for August 20th, 2021. Normally I ask Rainer how he's doing at this point, but instead this week has been so full of news of Afghanistan after Sunday's event where the Taliban marched into Kabul and took Kabul, which was essentially, I looked at a map, I wish I had it to share with you all, but essentially the entire country, except for some places up north where the old Northern Alliance is still active, but pretty much everywhere else in Afghanistan the Taliban controls, and that's been the case for several months now. It's nothing new. It's that there's no news in that. The only news is Taliban taking Kabul, and apparently they held negotiations with several countries and with various tribal leaders in Kabul and with various actors in Afghanistan to attempt to get all the shooting obstacles to clear out before they marched in. So they held back. They could have done this 2, 3, 4 weeks ago if they had wanted to, but I guess it's last minute negotiations with this, with the Russian Federation, China, Iran, with the United States, with various tribal leaders in Afghanistan, attempting to avoid a real bloodbath there, which is a good thing. And that's exactly what China, Russia and Iran have all been urging the Taliban to do, and holding out the carrot of recognition sometime down the road, and holding out the carrot of aid to the Taliban government. So and plus the obvious uh, cooperation that they can provide to the Taliban government if the Taliban leaves its old ways behind. And that's what they have promised, although there have been quite a number of violations of that promise already. So that's been going on. That's been the big news all week. We're going to start off our discussion on Afghanistan with an article that Rayner published yesterday. Afghanistan's destabilization is ongoing. So Rayner, take it away.
Hey, check out this Soviet symbol I created. Anyway, the situation in Afghanistan is something I'm hearing conflicting information about, because throughout this year, Biden has been privatizing the war in Afghanistan by replacing official troops with mercenaries. Companies like Triple Canopy have been profiting from this supposed end to the war. But somebody on Twitter just told me, somebody I know in person, somebody I respect and trust, just told me that these contractors have been forced to evacuate along with these other U.S. forces where the Taliban have taken over. So I'm going to try to dig more into that, see if my previous assessments about the war totally just continuing through mercenaries has been proven wrong. I hope to be proven wrong in my pessimism. But in either case, when it comes to that, the reality is that for the last 4 decades, around the last 4 decades, Afghanistan has been thoroughly destabilized by the socialist republic that that country had during the late 80s, I think it was. It might have been longer. Going into the collapse of the Soviet Union, the end of that collapse in 1992. And during Afghanistan's period of socialist governance, the masses had effectively rejected feudalism. They had started on the path to socialist development, becoming like a country like China or DPRK, Cuba. But the imperialists financed theocratic neo-feudal extremists who waged war against the republic, destroyed the republic's infrastructure so it couldn't develop too much further. And then in 1992, the Mujahideen won. And since then, the masses within Afghanistan have only been able to choose from 2 options: the Taliban or the US regime, with the Taliban actually being the lesser evil, because under the puppet government that the US set up, there were atrocities of unbelievable magnitude. CIA death squads, as in directed directly by the CIA, with the CIA's full knowledge and approval, committed crimes like burning down houses with little children in them, executing entire Afghan families, all just based on haphazard suspicions of these families associating with the Taliban. The United States has been the primary terrorist within Afghanistan throughout these last couple decades. And we'll see if this terror campaign is going to continue, to the extent to which it's going to continue in this new era for Afghanistan. We'll see to what extent these mercenaries are now able to operate within the country.
Yeah. I think, your friend is looking at Kabul and looking at the exodus out of Kabul, it's certain by now that American forces are out of Kabul. Now, where'd they go? That's the question I would ask, and I'm fairly well convinced that at least the American mercenaries, the CIA, and the American special forces, which are part of the U.S. military, that the Biden regime has committed to keeping there, that they are all still in Afghanistan. That's just where'd they go? Well, I mentioned earlier the Northern Alliance, the old Northern Alliance, which had been carrying out a guerrilla fight against the Taliban way prior to 2001, when the Americans, in late 2001, the Americans invaded Afghanistan. But prior to that, the Northern Alliance have been carrying out their guerrilla war against the Taliban for a number of years. So, yeah, my suspicion, I've seen reports of this, but my suspicion is that the American forces have not left. Those American forces that that Biden has committed to, publicly committed to Afghanistan, which is the mercenaries, the CIA, and the special forces, some special forces units, that they're all simply up reconnoitering with the with what is left of the Northern Alliance, and they're figuring out what strategy they're going to use to harry and harass the Taliban. But much more important to the Americans, and has always been much more important to the Americans, the American imperialists, that is to use those forces to drive terrorism towards Iran, China, and Russia. That's those are my suspicions. More will undoubtedly come as life goes on here in the next couple of months. Meanwhile, let's get back to the actual fall of Kabul. Let's see if I can find my place here. To some highlights that I wanted to start off with, and then some implications, both for Afghanistan, for the American empire, for Russia and China, for Iran. So I've selected a number of articles. You can imagine there's thousands of articles out there. The whole left has put out at least something. And I would just want to start off with some highlights. First of all, the fall of Kabul and the US quisling government came more swiftly than the Biden regime predicted. The puppet government and army that the US had been propping up since 1992, when the socialist government fell, they had fled before the arrival of the Taliban in the capital, as did the US government. The Taliban promised no bloodbath and general amnesty, and not to harass women, but has already reneged on that promise numerous times since Sunday. And of course, Sunday was the day that Kabul fell. China and Russia have been in negotiations with the Taliban for several months now to ensure a peaceful transition, no return of terrorists, meaning the U.S.-sponsored Al-Qaeda group, aid to the new government and an Afghan leg of the new Silk Road, the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. Women's rights will suffer, but they were already, as Rayner adequately pointed out, they were already terrible under the U.S. quisling regime and have been since the fall of Afghanistan's socialist government in 1992. Afghanistan's future is difficult to predict because the Taliban, like all fascist religious movements, is motivated by irrational beliefs and goals. It's really difficult to predict what irrational people are going to do. However, there is some hope that they will be more moderate this time around because Afghanistan's economy and the future of the Taliban regime ultimately depends on Chinese, Russian, and Iranian cooperation and aid. And the Chinese, Iranians, and Russians have put it to the Taliban in no uncertain terms. If you bring back the terrorists, that's their number one concern, because of course those terrorists are right next door to Iran, Russia, and China, and they slip over the borders and cause all kinds of mischief, as we've seen over the years. The American Imperial CIA mercenary forces now on the ground will surely stay behind indefinitely with the goal of spreading chaos in Afghanistan that can be propelled at Iran, China, and Russia. The American empire will continue the policy the Carter regime started in 1978 of funding, arming, and directing terrorist forces inside Afghanistan and projecting those forces against Iran, China, and Russia. Now for a few highlights from some articles. An article from Beijing, from the Associated Press on Tuesday, August 17th. Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, was in a call on Monday with U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. China, and I'm going to just read right from the AP article, China expressed a willingness to hold talks with the U.S. to promote a soft landing in Afghanistan while heavily criticizing Washington and again demanding that the Biden administration halt its attacks on China. Foreign Minister Wang Yi, in the phone call Monday with U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, blamed what he called America's hasty military withdrawal for the chaos accompanying the Taliban's seizure of power in Afghanistan, according to a foreign ministry statement dated Tuesday. Quote, China is willing to conduct communication and dialogue with the U.S. to promote the soft landing of the Afghan issue and avoid a new civil war or humanitarian disaster, and not let it become a breeding ground and shelter for terrorism once again, Wang was quoted as saying in the call. Wang said that China and the U.S. should cooperate on global issues and regional hotspots, but that the U.S. cannot, on the one hand, deliberately curb and suppress China to damage China's legitimate rights and interests, and on the other hand, count on China to offer support and coordination. In a one-sentence State Department statement, said that Blinken and Wang spoke about developments in Afghanistan, including the security situation and respective efforts to bring their citizens to safety. In other words, even in this AP article, it's quite evidence that the State Department isn't going to tell the American people anything about this, whereas the Chinese Foreign Ministry was quite forthcoming in what they discussed in this phone conversation. The rapid fall of Kabul shows us how little the U.S. Knows Afghanistan. That's a headline from Consortium News. I'll have the links below this video. Another headline: why Afghan forces so quickly laid down their arms. Politico, an opinion piece by Anatol Lievin. That's from August 16th. Another one, this one's from People's Daily, which is the official newspaper of the Communist Party of China. American legacy in Afghanistan. China expects new regime to break with terrorists. People's Daily, also from People's Daily, August 18th. And this originated from the Xinhua news agency, which is the Chinese government's official news agency. The challenge to China's national rejuvenation, Part 4, the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, future directions, international. That is, it is published by the nonprofit group called Future Directions International. Commentary: America's disastrous legacy in Afghanistan. That comes from Xinhua as well. That's from the 17th. World reacts to Taliban. Reacts as Taliban closes in on Afghan capital, from Al Jazeera. White House admits fair amount of U.S. weapons fell into Taliban hands. That's from RT Network, August 17th. The Taliban take Kabul. We're witnessing the gradual crumbling of an abysmally adept empire. Hubris and stupidity make for bad mix, from the Greenville Post, August 17th. Workers' World: what the U.S. defeat in Afghanistan means for U.S. global power, by Sara Flounders. And Workers' World, of course, is the newspaper of the Workers' World Party here in the United States. Russia and China can fill up geopolitical vacuum left by the U.S. in Afghanistan, says expert. That comes from the TASS news agency, which is the Russian Federation's official news agency. From the Party of Socialism and Liberation, a statement, they say U.S.-backed Afghan government surrenders to Taliban. And that comes from August 15th. And in that, I'm going to read you a couple lines from that statement because that's quite good. The unopposed entrance of the Taliban forces into Kabul marks the bitter conclusion of a 20-year-long military adventure by U.S. imperialism that senselessly inflicted death and suffering on an enormous scale. The fact that the US-backed Afghan government surrendered without a fight is the clearest indication that it was nothing more than an extension of US imperial power. In other words, it was a puppet government. No wonder they folded. The Taliban coming to power in the mid-1990s was the consequence of the CIA war against the socialist government of Afghanistan that had come to power in 1978 during the Sour Revolution. The US was perfectly willing to do business with the Taliban prior to September 11th, in spite of their odious policies, including their prohibition on the education of girls. The hope and promise of the earlier socialist period was crushed by the US intervention and the later collapse of the Soviet Union. Since then, the people of Afghanistan have lived under one reactionary government after another. The Biden administration was hoping to carry out an orderly withdrawal on its own terms. It is now suffering the humiliation of having to directly hand over control of the country to the Taliban, a major blow to the image of the U.S. military might around the world. This could have long-lasting implications for Biden's military and foreign policy going forward. And I think that last paragraph, it really hits the mark there. This is a major blow. This is, a lot of people have said, oh, this can't be compared to the fall of Saigon, blah, blah, blah. Yes, it actually can, because the fall of Saigon marked an extreme collapse around the world of confidence in the United States, in its governments, its state, confidence in its military. It was a major blow to the U.S. worldwide, and this will be as well. That's my prediction. Finally, from People's World, the newspaper of the Communist Party USA, as U.S. empire falters, people of Afghanistan pay the price. It's from August 16th. There is little reason to believe that the U.S. Special Forces and counterterrorism specialists won't continue to operate from time to time inside Afghanistan's borders. Plus, Pakistan remains a base of operations as well. And in the age of drone wars, it is not necessary for soldiers to be physically present in a country to impose U.S. power anyway. Time will tell the degree to which the current drama truly represents Washington's washing its hands of Afghanistan. Meanwhile, the Islamist militia forces of the Taliban, which ruled Afghanistan in the late 90s and harbored bin Laden, will now go about reconstructing their religious terror state. The prospects of peace and positive development in the country are zero. Women and girls face a grim future. Without a doubt, Afghanistan will still be paying the price of U.S. invasion and occupation for years to come. And the possibilities of peaceful development and progress and progressive change that appeared open to the country in the 1980s will recede further into the rearview mirror. Now, finally, from the Black Agenda report, Margaret Kimberly, Bar editor and senior columnist from 18 August 2021, Margaret says, the U.S. presence in Afghanistan should not be dismissed as merely a mistake, and no one should be sorry that it is winding down. It was the ultimate act of cynicism, a war crime. And you're right about that, Margaret. And no one should try to defend it, nor should anyone defend the presidents and members of Congress who voted for defense spending that is now more than 60% of the discretionary budget. There are many guilty parties in this story. So, Rainer?
I have a couple of takes. Firstly, if you're familiar with Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, I'm thinking of it right now.
Yeah.
The scenario,
I read it several years ago.
Yeah, the scenario that the novel imagines of a theocratic dictatorship taking over the United States and imposing a brutal patriarchal society where women have no rights. They're totally treated as second-class citizens. That scenario seemed to take place in a future where U.S. imperialism has declined so much that the U.S. occupier state can't even hold itself together anymore. And all that can fill the vacuum of capitalism is this sort of neo-feudal, theocratic authority that oppresses people in the most brutal ways imaginable. There's obviously propaganda about the Taliban. That's another layer of the cynicism of the U.S. empire. But the Taliban is definitely an applicable analogy to The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, definitely.
And to think
Can I
that
interrupt you for a
has come
second?
after.
Can I interrupt you for a sec? I'm going to
Yeah.
step away for a second, but I want you to just go ahead and finish your comments. And then just launch right into anti-Stalinists kill class consciousness. Got that in your brain? Anti-Stalinist kill class con. Okay, and hopefully I'll be back not too long from now. But just go ahead with your comments. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, my second take is that we can apply Mao's analysis on the strategy versus tactics of the imperialists to the situation in Afghanistan. Mao assessed that the reactionaries, the imperialists, are at the same time real tigers and paper tigers. They're at the same time capable of doing great damage. They're capable of doing great damage at the same time that they're weak in some key exploitable ways. And that's applicable to the situation we're seeing now, where on the one hand, the US empire is able to continue rallying its forces throughout Afghanistan, whether they're mercenaries who, as you theorize, have simply retreated to other parts of the country besides the capital, whether it's proxies like the East Turkestan Islamic movement, the Uyghur terrorist organization the US has clearly been at the very least enabling throughout the last year. But on the other hand, as you described, the US just underwent a level of international humiliation that it was equivalent to the humiliation it underwent during its loss of the Vietnam War. And this is also something to note, because now that the US, the ability of the US to hold this kind of control over a country like Afghanistan has been discredited, the US is going to have to retreat further into its late stage imperialist coping, as they say. The US empire is coping by telling itself these soothing stories about how the occupation it was actually vindicated. The occupation is actually justified by the fact that the Taliban is a brutal patriarchal regime, and the anti-war people, these neocons say, are proven wrong, when in reality the United States, US intervention are totally responsible for the situation that Afghanistan is in now. The Taliban hasn't taken over in spite of the US, it's taken over because of the US. Now for my article, Anti-Stalinist Kill Class Consciousness, it was prompted by a really ridiculous rant that a popular YouTuber ContraPoints made last week, where she said things about communism that you would plausibly expect to be said by a right-wing demagogue like Ben Shapiro. ContraPoints spun a narrative about how Marxist revolutions are based in envy, and how human nature has inevitably made revolutions like the ones in Russia and China devolve into authoritarian, dictatorial disasters, where you have these people irrationally informing on each other after the revolution out of envy. What's notable about ContraPoints rant is that it includes absolutely zero actual information. It's just saying things. ContraPoints didn't even bother to cite any sources for her characterizations of these revolutions. And her only attempt to ridicule socialism with Chinese characteristics was to derisively describe socialism with Chinese characteristics, didn't even describe any of the policies that are supposedly so worthy of ridicule. And a lot of Marxists have reacted to this rant. They've ridiculed ContraPoints for this. And in this article, I put it in the context of the last 100 years of anti-communist propaganda that's come not from the right, but from the left, from the people who are supposedly on the side of class struggle. One of the one of the perpetrators of the original sin of anti-communist sectarianism was Trotsky, who strategically lied as part of his opportunistic campaign to sabotage the Soviet Union, to paint Stalin as illegitimate. This narrative about the Soviet Union being totalitarian was ran with by people like Orwell, who spun anti-Sovietism into a vast mythology where the revolution had been tragically corrupted, and how state socialism is supposedly going to inevitably devolve into a nightmarish dystopia unless we manage to get leaders like Trotsky into these states. It's so incoherent. Trotskyism is so incoherent, contradictory, hypocritical, opportunistic, and Trotskyism adjacent arguments like the Soviet Union, Stalinism, or a betrayal of the revolution have since been appropriated by figures like Chomsky, who has vilified pretty much every workers' revolution, even global South social democracy throughout his entire career. And now you have people like ContraPoints able to just talk shit about communism without even feeling the need to cite anything to back up their claims. And this is because of the narratives that have been established for generations by these kinds of opportunists and distorters of the truth. Then you have criticisms of Stalinism or Stalin's actions, and I agree with those, but the way that anti-Stalinism is utilized is mostly in an opportunistic, dishonest way.
Right. Well put. What's this? This is a publication, ContraPoints? ContraPoints?
ContraPoints. She's a transgender, supposedly leftist, because leftist can mean anything, YouTuber.
Yeah, sounds like some homo creep, but
homo creep? What? That sounds problematic.
Yeah, you know, a postmodernist creep, a person who is reflecting postmodernist anti-communist ideologies.
I see.
A homo creep, as we would call it. Yeah. But your larger point is well put. That this, you know, most of, well, we know most of the rhetoric that comes from government sources, from Democrat and Republican sources, from the entire right wing, including the Democrat Party, which is should be obvious to all by now is right wing. We expect that, you know, they say these slanders and don't back it up with any evidence. They don't think that they have power, so they don't think that they need to back up anything they say. They just say it. The more problematic source of these lies, as you point out, is from people on the left, people, especially in the Marxist left, postmodernist, critical theorists, Marxist, neo-Marxist theorists, postmodernist Marxist theorists. That's where a lot of this shit comes from, and it's pretty vile because, like you say, they don't bother to back up their shit by anything. They're slime that's oozing out of their mouth. They don't bother to back it up. Okay, next on the list, the looming civilizational collapse of most of the globe, published by Rainer Shea on rainershea.com, August 14, 2021.
What we need to understand about the concept of societal collapse during the 21st century, during the climate crisis, is that it's not inevitable. We shouldn't just resign ourselves to the breakdown of social relations. The US empire is trying every single day to make this collapse inevitable. It's trying to engineer the impoverishment of most of the globe, trying to engineer scarcity and ethnic tensions and terrorism, so forth. And this is occurring not just in Afghanistan, but across increasingly large swaths of Africa. Since the 2011 NATO destabilization of Libya, where they bombed Africa's richest democracy out of existence, US imperialist intervention has been destabilizing the Horn of Africa, and broader neo-colonial influence has been destabilizing numerous other countries in Africa and Latin America, around the globe generally. I'm talking not just about places like Somalia, where the US, UK meddling has created the very terrorists that the US is now bombing and drone striking, but places like South Africa, which has remained capitalist despite its defeat of the apartheid regime, and has, as a consequence, remained a neo-colony where neo-apartheid conditions have remained. There's still great separation between the white and black populations. There's still income disparity. And these neo-apartheid conditions have been getting more severe in recent years as income inequality has increased, as the pandemic has hit the country, and I'm sure it's disproportionately impacted the Black population there. And as private security companies, private police have been discriminating against the Black population. Recently, these brewing tensions within South Africa have erupted into extremely destructive riots. So from what I can tell, even more destructive than the Black Lives Matter riots we experienced last year, where something like $1.5 billion worth of damage has been done to property, where supply chains have been breaking down. This is the consequence of neo-colonialism. And we're also seeing it in places like Haiti, where the US has been increasing its meddling by getting its proxies to assassinate the old president there, installing a new US favored leader, and has at least indirectly caused the recent unrest there. In all these places, Somalia, Libya, South Africa, Haiti, humanitarian crises have been getting magnified. And this is what we can expect for really every corner of the globe, unless workers' democracy prevails, unless the capitalist class are defeated.
Yeah, it's oh so true, and I'm very happy that you start this out with with the caveat that this does not have to happen. Really, what you say in regard to South Africa is quite telling as to what does have to happen, because South Africa had a strong Communist Party leadership. They had, however, the Communist Party there was susceptible to a lot of the class collaborationist bullshit that many communist parties around the world have succumbed to. And they had a lot of influence within the ANC. They were an integral affiliate of the ANC. The ANC, the African National Congress, which was the leading organization that carried out the revolution against the apartheid regime and finally won, they decided to go the route of retaining their capitalist economy and their capitalist state. Basically, they got rid of the apartheid aspect of it. In other words, the outright fascist part of it, but they kept the capitalist state, which is a reflection of the capitalist ruling class in South Africa. And they've worked, as many social democratic organizations around the world have for the last 120 years or so. They worked as the administrators of this capitalist state, as the government of this capitalist state, and they've been that way ever since. It's quite a long time now, and the Black community, which is something like 80% of the population of South Africa, are getting more and more and more tired of the excuses that the ANC government continues to feed them about how all things will get better. Yeah, I mean, the route that Nelson Mandela took after he became the first president of post-apartheid South Africa really was wrong-headed. It's not that there should not have that capitalism should have been totally wiped out, but the capitalist class should have been removed from power. The capitalist state should have been totally disassembled and smashed. The word Marx uses is smashed. And an authentic workers' state put in its place. The working class should have become the ruling class of South Africa, which would have meant that that South Africa would be ruled by working class people, the overwhelming majority of whom were Black. That's what should have happened, in my opinion. In my opinion, Mandela, great man that he was, superb human being that he was, in my opinion, he made a big mistake. By the way, Mandela was a secret member of the Communist Party of South Africa, a card-carrying member, but he kept, I guess they decided to keep that secret all the way along, even when he was president, because he had always operated at just as an ANC person and not as a Communist Party person. So they decided to continue that. But Mandela himself was a communist. And yet, this shows you what happens when when communist parties go down this road of class collaboration. When communist parties, inch by inch, they start on the slippery slope. The slippery slope started in 1935 with the Popular Front. And from there, it slid just as it did in the Soviet Union. We saw what happened in the Soviet Union because of that slippery slope, because of that decline into class collaboration. Collaboration with the enemy class, the capitalist class. It's really a shame. But South Africa is just one example of what happens under capitalism. Capitalist countries all over the world. I mean, the Arab socialist government of Muammar Gaddafi was driven out and overthrown by a coalition of the American empire and several terrorist jihadi organizations, primarily the ISIS and the Al-Qaeda, which in Libya, the American empire was funding, arming, giving training to, the whole bit. And after Muammar Gaddafi was brutally murdered, we saw what happened in Libya. Libya has fucking slave markets today. Libya is, refugees, massive amounts of refugees. Libya is a failed, the government that the US set up afterwards. It is a total failed government, it's a failed state, it's a failed regime. And there are legitimately, really, in a sense, at least two regimes claiming to run Libya, and they're at war with one another. That's Libya. I mean, it is a dystopian horror story, to paraphrase one smart young man that I know named Rainer. It's a dystopian horror story. Yeah. And anti-Stalinism always goes along with this. You're right to say, I mean, Stalin made mistakes. Did he make mistakes? Do you make mistakes? Do I make mistakes? Every fucking human being makes mistakes. Some of which, in my opinion, on Stalin's part, were mistakes that should not be defended and should not be excused. But overall, Stalin's intentions were towards building a modern socialist Soviet state, and that's exactly what he did. Not him alone. I mean, obviously he and the Communist Party and the people of the Soviet Union did that. But yes, he made mistakes. And my opinion has always been that the Popular Front, in the way it has been carried out in many countries around the world, was one of the biggest mistakes that he ever made. Like we had Gabriel Rockhill on the show about a month ago. And Rockhill pointed out that, Dimitrov, Grigory Dimitrov, the Hungarian communist, who was the actual author of the Popular Front strategy that Stalin adopted and that the Comintern adopted in 1936, that he pointed out that this should be coalitions built from below, built from alliances between people, between masses of people and mass organizations, not between, not backroom deals in the parliaments. However, What the Popular Front really has become is backroom deals in parliaments. That's the way it's been almost everywhere, and that's every disaster you can point to that flowed directly out of a Popular Front came from that. There are examples of Popular Fronts that were built from the ground up, from the grassroots, from the masses, like in China, for instance. Mao in China understood that idea that you build, that this isn't about gaining parliamentary control. This is about building up coalitions between people, coalitions between large mass organizations of people that bring together the people in a common revolutionary goal. That's a different kind of thing. And so therefore, when Mao implemented the Popular Front, it was done right. However, it was not done that way 95% of the time in 95% of the cases. Anyway, moving on. Next on the list, Africa's ever-deepening imperialist hell. More on the same, it's kind of the segue there, more coming out of the same kind of idea about Africa. This is Rainer Shea, August 16th, 2021. Take it away, Rainer.
This one also focuses on an additional country that's been destabilized by imperialism, Ethiopia. This last week, I've been learning about Ethiopia for the first time. It's not a country that has readily come up in my studies or in social media communist discussions of imperialism. Something that I've had to sort through, sift through the BS that I initially encountered from the media on Ethiopia. And this is about context, because the first article I encountered on the Ethiopia situation is that the humanitarian crisis there is all to be blamed on the current government, but really there's a larger situation, whatever government made in the crisis. The situation is that Ethiopia is under U.S. sanctions, and the U.S. has been treating Ethiopia on equal footing with the terrorist organization that has been destabilizing the country. It's been dishonestly refusing to classify this terrorist org as a terrorist org in kind of the same way that it's refused to classify the East Turkestan Islamic movement as a terrorist org. And this has been part of U.S. empire strategy to balkanize, partition, weaken, economically angulate the country. It hopes it's all about China. That's the essence of it. They're trying to score geopolitical points against China by exacerbating a growing hunger crisis, a growing refugee crisis in that country. And they're willing to replicate Ethiopia's famines of previous decades in order to do that.
Yeah. At one time, the Horn of Africa was a focal point because there were socialist governments there. They were doing revolutionary things. They had strong support of the Soviet Union and were working with the Soviet Union. And of course, the Americans worked with right-wing terrorists and terrorist organizations against them, and finally brought those governments down quite a long time ago in the 80s, basically. The Horn of Africa has been a pretty miserable place ever since. China has been making deals in the last several years to help build infrastructure in that part of Africa, as well as in the whole of Africa. So yeah, it's no surprise that the American that the American that the American government and its nefarious bad guys are trying to whip things up now again. No surprise at all. Okay, we got one more point. This will be a short point, and that is President Xi's latest book, Discourses on New Development Stage, Philosophy, and Paradigm. Now, I just wanted to mention this. This just came out. It was just published this week. And so I just want to, Xinhua, again, got a lot of stuff from Xinhua news agency, the Chinese government's news agency this week. Anyway, they say a compilation of discourses of Xi Jinping's General Secretary of the Communist Party of China Central Committee on China's new development stage, new development philosophy, and new development paradigm has been published by the Central Party Literature Press. The book includes 72 articles by Xi, also Xi, who is also Chinese president and chairman of the Central Military Commission. Xi's expositions, which are a key component of Xi Jinping thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era, provide important guidance to promoting the high quality economic and social development, fully building a modern socialist country, and realizing the Chinese dream of a great national rejuvenation. Yes, great national rejuvenation. That's the great national rejuvenation has been a central focus during President Xi's administration. So, Rainer, anything to add on that? Huh. Rainer seems to have frozen. Okay. I guess we're going to miss Rainer. All we've got is a pretty picture of him standing still, which is, oh, there you are. Anything to add on that, President Xi? His new book?
I only heard that he has a new book.
Oh, the rest of it didn't get through? Well, we're having internet problems here, internet slowing down problems. So, or maybe it's just somebody trying to fuck with us because we're speaking too much of the truth. Who knows? I'm not going to speculate. All I know is that it's frustrating. Anyway, that brings us to the end, unless you want to add anything else just to cap the night off.
Let's see. I have some goodies to show off. I have what's called a life straw. I have an individual first aid kit. I have a shovel that can be disassembled. I have some other survival stuff too. Not quite comfortable sharing that with the public. I hope that others get these kinds of items. I particularly hope they get an individual first aid kit, the type of first aid kit that the Army personnel have.
Okay. Coming on top of much else that you've said tonight, that makes perfect sense. With that, I will say thank you very much, Rainer, As always, great contributions to the show. And thank all of our watchers and listeners for tuning in to this episode of Revolutionary Socialist Review. We will be back next week with another episode. And until then, I'll leave you with Shakespeare's words. I bid you a sweet adieu.